A decorated cop thought he could assault a woman in broad daylight and get away with it. He didn't know her cousin was a retired legend named Steven Seagal. That was his first and last mistake. The wind whipping through Chicago's Loop carried the scent of roasted coffee and exhaust fumes, a familiar perfume for the city's relentless pulse. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, and the sun glinted off the steel and glass canyons, making pedestrians squint. Among them was Maya, a woman whose sharp, intelligent eyes missed nothing. As an independent journalist, it was her job to see what others overlooked. She adjusted the cracked glasses on her nose, a recent, unwelcome souvenir, and pushed through the grand brass revolving doors of the Century Tower, her heart still hammering against her ribs. Just 10 minutes earlier, her day had shattered. She was meeting her cousin, Steven, at Cafe Vento, a cozy Italian spot just around the corner. Stepping out of her office building, she'd been focused on the message on her phone, a confirmation from a source on a story about City Hall corruption. That's when it happened. A solid mass of muscle and blue uniform blocked her path. Before she could react, an elbow slammed into her cheek with a sickening thud. The force of the blow sent her stumbling sideways, her head cracking against the cold brass door frame. Her glasses flew off, hitting the granite steps with a sharp crack. Pain, white-hot and blinding, exploded behind her eye. Through a dizzying haze, she saw him, Officer Trent Harland. He stood over her, a smug smirk twisting his lips, his aviator sunglasses reflecting the sky, hiding his eyes. He was chewing gum, slowly, deliberately, a picture of arrogant authority. "Watch where you're going, sweetheart," he sneered, his voice loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "Some of us have important work to do." You hit me," Maya stammered, clutching her face, feeling the swell already forming. "On purpose." Harlan chuckled, a low, ugly sound. "That's what happens when people don't show respect for the badge. Maybe you'll learn your place." He turned to walk away, confident in his untouchable power, leaving her humiliated on the steps. But he didn't get far. A voice, low and calm as a frozen lake, cut through the city noise. "You have exactly 3 seconds to apologize to her." Harlan stopped. He turned slowly, the smirk still on his face. Standing 5 feet away was a man who seemed to have materialized from the shadows. He was older, perhaps 60, with a neatly trimmed, gray-streaked beard that framed his stern mouth. He wore a simple dark gray Henley shirt and worn-in cargo pants, but he carried an aura of immense stillness and power. It was Steven Seagal. "And who the hell are you?" Harlan scoffed, puffing out his chest. "Her grandpa." 2 seconds, Steven said, his voice unchanging. He took a single, deliberate step forward. "Look, old man, I don't take orders from civilians," Harlan spat, taking a step to loom over Steven. "Now get out of my way before I arrest you for interfering." He never finished the sentence. In a movement too fast to follow, Steven's hand shot out, not in a punch, but in an open palm strike that intercepted Harlan's advancing arm. With a subtle twist of his wrist, a classic Aikido kotegeshi, he turned the officer's momentum against him. A sharp crack echoed as Harlan's wrist bent at an unnatural angle. The officer cried out, his face a mask of shock and pain. Before he could recover, Steven's other hand struck his abdomen with a precise palm heel strike. The air rushed out of Harlan's lungs in a wheezing gasp, and he crumpled to his knees, utterly defeated. The crowd gasped. Phones were up, dozens of them, recording every second. Steven stood over the groaning officer, his expression unreadable. "You dishonor the uniform," he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet carrying more weight than a shout. The lesson was over. The story, however, was just beginning. Within hours, the digital world was on fire. Hashtag Justice for Maya and hashtag Seagal School Cop were trending worldwide. The dozens of cell phone videos from every conceivable angle told an undeniable story. A woman assaulted, an arrogant cop, and a quiet, bearded man delivering a masterclass in controlled force. The public crowned Steven a hero. News channels played the clip on a loop. Maya, her face bruised but her spirit unbroken, became a symbol for everyone who had ever felt powerless against authority. But in the shadows, a different storm was brewing. In a musty basement of a defunct bowling alley in an industrial part of Chicago, the air was thick with cigar smoke and resentment. This was the unofficial headquarters of the SHIELD unit, a clandestine fraternity of corrupt officers who operated as a gang with badges. Their leader, Sergeant Caleb Knox, a man with a Marine Corps tattoo crawling up his neck and eyes as cold as a morgue slab, paced in front of a flickering television screen, watching the video of Harlan's humiliation again and again. "He made us look weak," Knox growled, slamming his fist on a dusty pin setter. "This actor, this nobody, put one of ours on his knees in front of the whole world. He broke the first rule. You don't touch one of us. Ever." The other members murmured in agreement, their faces grim. "We're going to remind this city who runs it," Knox declared. "And we're going to teach Mr. Seagal a permanent lesson about respect." Miles away, at his secluded cabin nestled in the forest bordering a serene Illinois lake, Steven felt the shift in the air. His home was his sanctuary, a place of peace with a meticulously raked Japanese garden and a pond where koi fish swam in lazy circles. But tonight, the familiar tranquility felt charged, like the air before a lightning strike. As he and Maya sat on the porch, a black Dodge Challenger with heavily tinted windows drove past their long, gravel driveway. It moved too slowly, its presence a jarring note in the symphony of crickets and rustling leaves. "They know where I live," Steven said, his eyes fixed on the empty road. "We could go to the media," Steven, Maya urged, her journalist instincts kicking in. She had already started digging, connecting Trent Harlan to a string of brutality complaints that had all mysteriously vanished. "We can expose them." "Not yet," he countered, his voice firm. "They're not criminals who fear the light. They're predators who hunt in the dark. We have to be ready for them to come here." Later that night, long after Maya had gone to bed, Steven sat in his study, watching a bank of monitors linked to military-grade night vision cameras he'd installed around his property. For hours, there was nothing but the ghostly, green-tinged images of swaying trees and nocturnal animals. Then, at 2:13 a.m., he saw it. For figures dressed in black, moving with tactical precision through the tree line, making their way towards the cabin. They were trying to be silent, but to a man like Steven, their presence screamed. The hunt had begun. He didn't move to call the police. He simply rose, a silent shadow in the dark, and walked toward the large, ornate wooden chest in the corner of the room. It was time to greet his guests. The silence of the cabin was shattered by the splintering crack of the front door being forced open. Four men, clad in black tactical gear and armed with collapsible batons and tasers, stormed inside, expecting to find their targets sleeping and vulnerable. Instead, they found the ground floor cloaked in darkness and an unnerving silence. Steven was waiting. He had positioned himself in the shadows of the main living area, a heavy, handcrafted oak nunchaku held loosely in one hand. As the first intruder swept a flashlight beam across the room, Steven moved. He wasn't a bull. He was a phantom, a blur of motion, and the nunchaku whipped through the air, connecting with the man's temple with a sickening crack. The man dropped without a sound, his flashlight rolling across the hardwood floor, its beam cutting crazily through the darkness. The second man, startled, swung his baton wildly. Steven ducked under the clumsy attack, flowing forward. He didn't use the nunchaku this time. Instead, he drove the solid oak handle into the man's throat. The attacker choked, dropping his weapon and clawing at his neck as he folded to the floor. Panic began to set in. The remaining two intruders moved back to back, trying to cover all angles. "Where is he?" one whispered, his voice tight with fear. From the kitchen, a heavy oak dining table suddenly slid across the floor, crashing into them and separating them. It was a simple, brutal use of the environment. As one man stumbled, Steven was on him. He disarmed him with a fluid wrist lock and used the man's own momentum to slam him into the wall hard enough to crack the drywall. The last man stood frozen, his taser aimed at the shadows. He saw a flicker of movement and fired. the electric prongs trailing wires as they hit an empty armchair. It was a fatal mistake. Before he could react, Steven was behind him. He didn't strike. He simply placed the cold, hard steel of a Tonto blade against the man's neck. The intruder stiffened, the smell of his own fear filling the air. "Drop it." Steven's voice was a low growl in his ear. The taser clattered to the floor. Steven expertly bound the intruders with their own zip ties, then dragged them out onto the front lawn. He had been careful. They were battered, bruised, and terrified, but they would live. By the time the flashing lights of a sheriff's cruiser appeared at the end of the driveway, Steven was sitting calmly on his porch swing, sipping a cup of tea. Sheriff Daniels, a weathered man and an old friend, stepped out of the car, his eyes taking in the scene. The hog-tied intruders, the broken door, and Steven, looking as if he'd just finished meditating. "You sure know how to throw a welcome party, Steve," Daniels said, his voice a mix of exasperation and respect. "They were uninvited," Steven replied simply. Daniels sighed, kneeling to inspect one of the unconscious men. He recognized the tactical gear, the unspoken signature of Knox's crew. "You know what this means, right? This isn't just a grudge anymore. You've declared war on a faction inside the department." Steven's gaze hardened as he looked out towards the dark lake. "No," he corrected him. "They declared war on my family. I'm just finishing it." Daniels knew then that this wouldn't be solved with paperwork. He stood up, his decision made. "All right, Steve," he said, keying his radio. "Let's finish it together." The failed midnight raid pushed the SHIELD unit further into the shadows, but it didn't extinguish their rage. It stoked it. Officer Harland was officially suspended pending investigation, a meaningless gesture as he was still on Knox's payroll. For Steven and Maya, the days that followed were a strange mixture of calm and coiled tension. The alliance with Sheriff Daniels was their only real shield. Daniels, a man who believed in the law even when its enforcers didn't, set up a secure, encrypted communication channel for them. More importantly, he activated a source deep within the corrupt unit, a young, conscience-stricken officer who had seen too much and was ready to talk. While Daniels worked the official channels, Steven focused on the immediate threat. He took Maya out to the long wooden pier that stretched over the lake each morning. The setting was peaceful, with mist rising off the water and birds singing in the pines, but the lessons were deadly serious. He didn't teach her complex martial arts. He taught her survival. "They will grab you here," he'd say, demonstrating a wrist grab. "Don't fight their strength. Use your body's mechanics. Turn, drop your weight, and strike here." He showed her how to use her keys, a pen, or even a rolled-up magazine as a weapon. She was a quick study, her fears slowly being replaced by a focused determination. Meanwhile, Maya waged her own war. Working from a laptop in the cabin's spare room, she became a digital ghost. Using the intel provided by Daniel's source, she cross-referenced public records, financial statements, and anonymous tips she'd gathered over the years. Slowly, a dark web began to emerge on her screen. A complex map of the SHIELD unit's network, their illegal businesses, their intimidation tactics, and their connections that reached high into the city's power structure. She was no longer just a victim. She was the huntress, tracking the monster to its lair. "They're not just a crew, Steven," she said one evening, showing him the intricate chart she'd created. "They're an enterprise. Extortion, evidence tampering, it's all here." She had found their weakness. Their arrogance had made them sloppy. Their fragile peace was shattered late one afternoon by a single, encrypted text from Daniel's source. "Knox knows about the mole. He's lost it, gathering the whole crew. Coming for you tonight. All of them. This is the end game." The storm had arrived. Steven looked at Maya, whose face was pale but resolute. He then looked out at the setting sun, which painted the lake in hues of orange and blood red. "Good," he said softly. "I'm tired of waiting." They weren't just going to defend the cabin. They were going to turn it into a tomb for the SHIELD unit. As dusk bled into a moonless night, the forest around the cabin fell silent. Not a peaceful silence, but a heavy, expectant one. Steven stood alone on the small wooden bridge that served as the only entrance to his property. Below him, a shallow creek gurgled over smooth stones. Behind him, The cabin was dark, appearing deserted. He was the bait, and he knew the wolves were coming. Headlights cut through the darkness. A convoy of 4 vehicles, SUVs and an unmarked van, rolled to a stop at the edge of the woods. Doors opened, and over a dozen men, led by Caleb Knox, piled out. They were geared for war, armed with tactical shotguns and automatic rifles. They believed in overwhelming force. Knox, holding a megaphone, stepped forward. His amplified voice boomed across the clearing. "Seagal, we know you're in there. We know you're with the girl. This ends tonight. You embarrassed our batch. You broke our bones. Now we break you." The words were meant to intimidate, but every syllable was being captured by high-fidelity microphones Steven had hidden in the trees. Steven didn't answer. He simply waited, a motionless silhouette against the faint starlight. "Fine. Have it your way." Knox screamed. "Light him up." The first wave of men charged the bridge. As they thundered across the wooden planks, Steven moved with blinding speed, using a knife to slash 2 thick ropes on the side of the bridge. With a groan of splintering wood, half of the bridge gave way, sending 3 men tumbling into the rocky creek below. Chaos erupted. The remaining men opened fire, their muzzle flashes illuminating the night. Steven was no longer on the bridge, but had melted back into the shadows of his front yard, using the trees and a stone wall as cover. He moved like a force of nature, a blur of deadly efficiency. He disabled one man with a precise throw of his Eskrima stick to the knee, then disarmed another who got too close, using the man's own rifle to knock him unconscious. He was a ghost, striking and vanishing, turning their numbers into a liability. Finally, Knox and his remaining inner circle crossed the creek and cornered him in the open yard. "It's over, old man," Knox shouted, aiming his pistol. "You're outnumbered." Steven straightened up, a calm smile touching his lips. He looked Knox dead in the eye. That's what makes the wolf pack dangerous. On cue, the world exploded in light. High-powered floodlights from all directions simultaneously blasted the yard, turning night into day. From the forest, from the far side of the lake, figures emerged, dozens of them. State police SWAT, clad in black, rifles raised, with the red dots of their laser sights dancing across the chests of every member of the SHIELD unit. Knox spun around, his face a canvas of disbelief and horror. Sheriff Daniels marched out of the trees, his shotgun leveled. "Caleb Knox," Daniels' voice rang out, clear and final. "You and every man here are under arrest for conspiracy, attempted murder, and a dozen other felonies. Drop your weapons." Now, trapped, exposed, and utterly defeated, the members of the SHIELD unit dropped their guns. As Knox was forced to his knees, his hands cuffed behind his back, he saw her. Maya stepped out from the cabin's dark porch. She wasn't holding a weapon. She was holding a small, professional-grade digital audio recorder, its red recording light glowing brightly in the harsh glare of the floodlights. The final, damning evidence. The capture of the SHIELD unit sent shockwaves through Chicago and beyond. It was more than just the arrest of a few corrupt cops. It was the toppling of a criminal empire that had festered within the heart of law enforcement. News channels ran montages, the mayor issuing a public apology, the police chief resigning, and federal investigators launching a full-scale probe into the department. The cell phone video of Trent Harland was now shown alongside footage of Knox's crew being led away in cuffs, a perfect before and after of justice served. Life at the lake returned to a quiet rhythm, but it was a new kind of quiet, one born of peace, not of waiting. The scars, both physical and emotional, began to fade. One crisp morning, as the sun rose and cast a golden sheen across the water, Steven stood on the pier. Practicing Tai Chi, his movements were slow, fluid, and powerful, a dance of perfect balance between strength and grace. The violence was over, but the discipline remained. He had faced the storm and found his center once more. Maya came out of the cabin, carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. She handed one to him, and they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the day being born. Her in-depth exposé on the SHIELD unit had been published a week prior. It was a masterpiece of investigative journalism that not only told their story, but gave a voice to dozens of other victims who had been too afraid to speak out before. She hadn't just reported the news. She had changed the conversation. Steven took a sip of his tea, the warmth spreading through him. He finally understood. True strength wasn't found in the fury of a perfectly executed strike or the ability to withstand pain. It was in the quiet resolve to protect what you love, in the wisdom to know that some fights are not won with fists, but with truth. One man's refusal to back down had exposed the darkness. But it leaves a lingering question. How many other SHIELD units operate in the shadows, hiding behind a badge? In your city, do you believe justice will always prevail? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and please, comment respect for all opinions. If you stand for justice, subscribe and share this story.